Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching A Plus Technician PC Component Installation and Configuration. This is part of Train Signal Fast Track CBT video, CompTIA A Plus. In this video, our goal is to ensure that A Plus technicians know how to install, configure, and troubleshoot PC components. So that means we'll talk about how to upgrade and install motherboards, storage, CPU, RAM, and power supplies. We'll talk about considerations when upgrading your PC or buying a new PC. Then we'll learn how to install a new display device, RAM, and hard drive. So with that, let's get started. First, we'll talk about our A Plus Technician exam objectives. Now what I've done is I've taken the IT Technician exam, the 22602, and I've put those objectives in black. I've taken the Remote Support Technician exam, 22603, and I've put those objectives in red. Then I've taken the Depot Technician exam, the 22604, and put those objectives in blue. And to be honest with you, much of the content covered in this technician video is very similar to the content covered in the A Plus Essentials videos covering PC components. So the technician exam is very similar to the Essentials exam. The differences being they just go into a little bit more detail. So this first paragraph here in black covers domain 1.1 of the IT Technician exam 602, where you talk about installing, configuring, optimizing, and upgrading personal computer components, knowing how to add, remove, and configure components listed here, storage devices, motherboards, power supplies, processors, memory, display devices, input devices, adapter cards, and cooling systems. Now we went through much of this in the video series earlier under A Plus Essentials, so we're not going to go through it all again, but we're going to go through a specific scenario of upgrading your computer, and we'll learn how it relates to these different things. The second paragraph here is Objective 1.1, and that's of the Remote Support Technician exam, where you talk about installing, configuring, optimizing, and upgrading personal computer components. All right, and then the third objective here, shown in blue, is part of the Depot Technician exam. Again, it's Objective 1.1 of Depot Technician, and it's very similar in topics: install, configure, optimize, and upgrade personal computer components. But it goes into a little bit different aspects of doing those things. So it talks about drive preparation instead of storage devices specifically. It talks about jumper configuration, storage device and power cabling configuration, selection and installation of an appropriate motherboard, BIOS setup and configuration. We showed you how to go into the BIOS already and make some configuration changes. Selection and installation of appropriate CPU, installation of adapter cards, configuration and optimization of adapter cards, and how to add and remove and configure PC computer systems. All right, so those are the different objectives we'll be covering in this video. They're all Objective 1.1, but in their specific testing area, A Plus Technician testing area. All right, to help us learn more about upgrading computers, I have a scenario here where we'll talk about upgrading your PC. So let's say that you have a PC that's a few years old. Now instead of throwing it out, you would like to upgrade it. It only makes sense, right? To preserve your investment, you should be able to spend less money than it would take to buy a brand new PC. However, you'll have to make sure that that's really true. As a PC technician, you now have the knowledge to do the upgrades yourself, so that should help you with the cost. You don't have to pay someone else to upgrade your processor or upgrade your RAM. But you still need to be mindful about how the current technology you have can be upgraded, or if it can be upgraded at all, or if it can be upgraded without too much significant replacement. So some of the components you'll need to consider when it comes to upgrading your current PC, I've listed out here. First off, the motherboard. What motherboard do you have now? Would you want to replace the motherboard when you upgrade your PC? How much RAM do you have now, or memory? And how much would you want to upgrade to? And in what form factors, and in what quantities? What processor do you have now, and would you want to upgrade that? What power supply do you have now? Will it handle all your new components? What display device, what graphics card and monitor do you have now? Will you want to upgrade that? What input devices do you have now? I mean, typically you're talking about mouse and keyboard, but maybe you need a 3-button mouse or a wheel mouse instead of the old mouse that you have. How about any adapter cards? Do you need to upgrade to 100 base T Ethernet instead of 10 base T, or up to 1 gig Ethernet instead of 100? What about a cooling system? Does your current case have enough fans to cool the new processor that you might put in, for example? And then what about storage? Are you out of hard drive space? Do you want redundant hard drives? Do you want faster hard drives? These are all things you need to consider when it comes to upgrading your PC. So to compare the current PC you might have to a new PC, let's go take a look at a new PC that you might be considering. All right, so I've gone out to the Dell website and I've created a PC for us that I think would be a nice home or small business PC. It's a Dimension E520. These computers from Dell are always changing. This is just an example of a decent system that I found out on their website. And what I wanted to do is take the product details I created in this PDF file and compare these to the newer system that we might be considering. What features are on the new system compared to what could you upgrade your current system to. So when you go out to the Dell website, perhaps to go do this yourself, of course this system may or may not be there, and chances are the RAM and the hard drive and the processor speed, all those things will have changed. So just consider this as an example. So if I scroll down here, what we can see is that we have a number of choices on this system. And the number of choices you might have when it comes to upgrading your current system might be similar. So we can choose between an Intel Core 2 Duo processor, and it says it's an E6300. We can choose a D930 with dual core technology. It's a 3 gigahertz with an 800 megahertz front side bus. That's the speed of the bus, and that 800 megahertz is really fast. There's a D915 with dual core technology that's 2.8 gigahertz with still an 800 megahertz front side bus. There's a D805 with dual core technology. It's a 2.66 gigahertz with a 533 megahertz front side bus. You could also put a Pentium 4 in this motherboard, or a Celeron 346. Now this system has the Intel G965 Express chipset, so just keep that in mind. Then it talks about your operating system, and you have to compare, what operating system do you want on the new PC. This PC offers Windows Vista, Ultimate, Business, Home Premium, or Home Basic. You'd have to go out to the Microsoft website to compare the differences between these to know which of these Vista operating systems you would want on your PC. All right, next it talks about the memory. Tell you what, let me zoom this in a little bit, see if that helps us view this clear. Okay, there we go, that looks better. There we go. All right, the memory. It offers DDR2 memory. It says this is a memory architecture that enables systems to improve performance and reduce power consumption. The amount of RAM you have determines how many programs can be executed at one time and how much data can be readily available to a program. Well, we knew that. We learned about RAM. Simply put, the more RAM you have, the more programs you can run smoothly and simultaneously. Now, this computer, this case, offers up to 4 gigabytes of RAM, and it's dual channel DDR2 SD-RAM, and it runs at 533 megahertz. So keep that in mind on your current system. How much RAM do you have? Do you want up to 4 gigabytes of RAM? And what is the speed of the bus on your RAM? Is your RAM speed that fast? Is it 533 megahertz? We'll want to keep that in mind. Then it comes to hard drives. It says that this case supports up to 2 hard drives. How many hard drives can you put in your case? We have a potential capacity of, it says 320 gigabytes per hard drive, and these are SATA hard drives. So say you go down to your local electronics store to shop for a new hard drive. I'd be willing to bet you could easily find a 500 gig hard drive and maybe your case supports up to 3 hard drives or even 4 in some cases. Um, so with 4 hard drives, 500 gigabytes each, you could put up to 2 terabytes in your computer case. So keep that in mind. This Dell system only supports up to 640 gigabytes when you buy it brand new. That's 2 320 gigabyte hard drives. We'll also want to ask, well, what's the standard for SATA? How fast of SATA is that? What's the transfer rate for that SATA? Right, then there's optical drives. This computer case supports multiple DVD read-write combo drives or DVD-ROM drives. So DVD-ROM would be read-only. DVD read-write could, of course, read and write. You could put a 3-in-1 floppy or a 13-in-1 media reader on this system. So when it's talking about the 13-in-1 media reader, it's talking about those different types of form factors of flash we talked about earlier, which would be like the compact flash, the SD cards, the Sony Memory Stick Pros, different types of flash cards that could be inserted into this media reader. All right, so if we scroll on down, next it talks about the graphics card. What kind of graphics card are you going to want in your system, and how fast do you need it to be? How much RAM do you need it to have? It says here they can have an NVIDIA 256 megabyte PCIe Express card. There can be an ATI Pro 256 megabytes or an Intel Graphics Media Accelerator. So what kind of RAM or what kind of VGA graphics card do you have in your system now, and what kind do you need or want to upgrade your system to have? Next, they talk about the Sound Blaster X-Fi Extreme Music with Dolby 5.1, or you can get an integrated 7.1 channel audio card. 2 options. It shows the system here, the front of the system. Shows the inside. Here's the drive bays. Looks like the processor's there. Shows the back of the system. You can see the fans here and the power supply. It says externally accessible. This system has a DVI video output, a VGA, or one super video. So it says that this is with the add-in PCI Express video card. Optionally, you can get a FireWire port. You can get a 6-pin serial connector, 7 USB ports, 2 in the front, 5 in the back. So how many USB ports does your system have? Does it have any in the front? Is that important to you when you go to hook up your digital camera to have a USB port in the front? Audio, 6 back panel connections for line in, line out, microphone, rear surround, side surround, a lot of different audio stuff. Network integrated, 10/100. Do you need a gig interface? Is a 10/100 adequate for you? Then what about expansion? How many expansion slots does this system have? It has 2 PCI slots, just regular slots. It has 1 PCIe, a by 1 slot, or an X1 slot. It has a PCIe X16 slot that's used for graphics. So 2 regular PCI, 1 PCI 1X, and 1 PCI X16 used for graphics. All right, the power supply in this chassis is a 305 watt DC power supply. How many watts is your power supply? Maybe you're going to put in 4 hard drives in there and 2 DVD drives. Maybe you're going to need more than 300 watts, something to look at. What about the battery backup? That's pretty standard. Really, this system has battery backup for the BIOS so that it, when the power is completely lost to the system, it doesn't lose the system time and date. This has a 3V CR2032 lithium coin cell, so it's like a little watch battery inside the system. I'm sure just about any relatively new motherboard has something similar. There are 3 3.5-inch bays, 1 external and 2 internal. So the 1 external would be used for like a floppy drive or a media reader. The 2 internal would be used for hard drives. Then there's 2 5.5-inch bays, and those would be used for like DVD drives. There's 4 DIMM slots. These are your RAM slots, so you could put up to 4 chips in there. So to get to 4 gigabytes, as it talked about earlier, you'd have to put in 4 1-gig chips. Keep that in mind. So if there was only 2 slots, to get to 4 gigs, you'd have to put in 2 2-gig chips. and those two gig chips could be much more expensive than four 1 gig chips, because the higher density of the RAM, the more expensive it gets. All right, that's the end. That's the end of our new system that we're comparing to see what it is we need to upgrade our current system to be similar to a new system. And this new system, like I said in here, it isn't a specific system. It kind of shows the different options that are available. But these are all things you would consider when it comes to upgrading your current system to a more recent technology level. All right, so that's our scenario. We have our current system and we have our new system. Let's move on and talk about in more detail the specific components that we would want to consider as we go through and talk about upgrading it. All right, so first off, the motherboard. The motherboard is where everything connects. The motherboard is the component that affects all other components of your PC. So if you don't have PCI slots on your motherboard, you're not going to be able to put in a PCI graphics adapter or a PCI video card. If you don't have enough RAM slots to get to the RAM level that you want, you're not going to be able to upgrade your RAM no matter how much RAM you buy if you don't have the slots on the motherboard. The type of processor socket you have determines the type of processor CPU that you can upgrade to. And so that motherboard's going to influence your speed. How fast can your system go to? So to me, it's one of the most important components of the whole computer is the motherboard. Now, first off, does your motherboard need upgrading? What do new motherboards offer you that yours does not? So look at the motherboard you have, and you're going to have to really find out the specs. If you don't have the book for the motherboard, you're going to have to go out on the internet and find the book or find the specs for the PC and determine, okay, how much RAM could the motherboard go up to, and in what increments, what size DIMMs do I use to put in that motherboard? How fast of a processor can I go up to? What type of card slots do I have? What type of integrated devices do I have? Do I have integrated video, USB, Ethernet? Am I going to have to buy separate cards to use that stuff? What if I have integrated video and I want to buy a brand new high-speed video card? Is there some way to disable the integrated video? And am I capable of doing that? Keep all those things in mind. Some of the older expansion slot technologies are ISA and PCI. Some of the technologies that are being phased out are AGP for video cards. AGP for video cards is really being replaced with PCI Express. PCI Express was created by Intel in 2004. And when I say PCI is being phased out, I just mean that PCI Express is here. Even a new motherboard may still have a few PCI slots to support older types of cards. The most important thing, though, is that you have some newer card slots that support the newest cards, PCI Express. Now, with PCI Express, you can have a maximum of 32 lanes, maximum bandwidth of 2.5 gigabytes per second. Now, with PCI Express 2.0 that was released in January, you're able to double the speed of a PCI Express card slot to 5 gigabytes per second. So that might be something to consider. Does your motherboard support PCI Express 2.0? And the important thing here to note is that there's new technology coming out, seems like every month. So even though you go and you look at a motherboard 1 month, if you wait 3, 4, 5 months before you actually go buy it, by then there's a whole new standard out for something like PCI or USB or whatever it is you're looking for, and you need to really do all that research again. So you have to act fast. And as soon as you buy something, keep in mind, a few months later, it's going to be out of date, and there's going to be something newer that comes out. You can't play the game of just trying to keep up with technology. You have to keep in mind that you just need to get what it is that's going to allow you to do what you need to do. So if there's some game you want to play, great, get the system that's going to support that game. And I wouldn't, in my personal opinion, keep trying to upgrade to get the latest and greatest technology, because it's a never-ending battle. Wait a few years before the system you have just seems too slow to play the newer games you want to play, and then go out and completely replace or upgrade your system. All right, the next thing to consider is memory. On your motherboard and on the new motherboard, how much RAM can you get? What's the physical size of the RAM? What type of RAM does the old system use, and what type does the new system use? So could you just buy some new RAM for your current system? And if so, how much would it cost, and how much RAM could you upgrade to? And how fast is that RAM? There's different speeds of RAM. Here we talk about PC100, PC133, different types of modules like PC2, 3200, 4200, 5200, 6400, all different types of speeds and modules are available. And then all different types of capacities are available. So, does it come in 256 meg chips, 512, 1 gig? Just so many different options available. To me, the best thing to do is to go out to a website where they have kept track of all these different things, all the different types of off-the-shelf systems, motherboards, different brand names and models, and then the different memory chips that match up with those. So let's go out to this website I've used before called Crucial.com. And the first thing it says on the home page is, not sure which memory upgrade you need? Use the Crucial Memory Advisor tool. And this is just an example of a tool that's available for free on the internet. There's other websites, of course, that also do this. This is just an example. So what I do is, say I select the manufacturer here. Let's say that I currently have a Dell. Then it asks me for the product line. Well, let's say that I have, where's my Power Edge? I have a Power Edge low-end server. It's a SC430. All right, and right now I have 512 megs in my low-end server. And what I really want is 2 gigs. So if I go down here, it tells me that I have 4 slots on this motherboard. See, it knows that without me ever having to go over there and open the case. It tells me I have 4 slots, and they're arranged in 2 banks of 2. So what that means is I have to install my modules in pairs. So right now I have 512 megs, so that means there must be 2 pairs in there. So I have 2 256 meg chips. So say I want 2 gigs. I've got 512. I can't buy a gig and a half. To me that would be the logical thing is, well, I'll just buy a gig and a half of RAM, which is 80 plus 40, that's about $120. You combine that with what I have, and I get my 2 gigs for $120. Well, it doesn't work like that. And the reason is this is 2 chips, and this over here, this is 2 chips. So when I combine the 256 megs and the 1 gig, I get 1.5, but I filled up all my slots with 1.5 megs, or 1.5 gigs, excuse me. So to get to 2 gigs, I have to buy the 2 gig kit, which is 2 1 gig chips, which is going to cost me more. It's going to cost me $157, but that's the only way I can get to 2 gigs. So just keep that in mind, that this is how it works. Now it says the maximum memory here is 4 gigs, or 4,096 megabytes. So the maximum I could go to would be 2 gigs. Buy the 2 gig kit twice. I would fill up all 4 slots with 1 gig chips, and I would have 4 gigs of RAM. Now another question, or it answers some frequently asked questions down here. Like, how much memory can my computer handle? Do I have to install in pairs? Will my system recognize the maximum upgrade? It says possibly. The Windows OS will recognize 32-bit versions, only 3 gigs or 3.5 gigs. And to utilize more memory, it says I'll have to upgrade to a 64-bit version of my operating system, which means I would also have to have a 64-bit processor. You can find more information at this link. Well, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but also keep that in mind. Can my operating system support the amount of RAM I have? can my motherboard support the amount of RAM I want? All these things work together, so you have to think about them all together. All right, so on some motherboards it says RAM is combined in a bank and the entire bank must be filled, and that's what we talked about is you have to put in 2 chips or pairs of chips. You should know how much memory your system has, how much it can go up to, how many slots would be used to do it. Some PC manufacturers have fewer memory slots and force you to buy RAM in higher density, or they filled all the memory slots up, forcing you to throw out the current RAM and buy more. So it could be that I bought my computer and I got 1 gig of RAM, and I know that it can go to 4. Well, that's great. But what if the motherboard or the system manufacturer filled up all 4 slots with 256 meg chips? Well, all my slots are full, so I can't possibly upgrade anymore because I don't have any more space, right? So what I would have to do is throw away all 4 256 meg chips and buy 4 1 gig chips to go to 4 gigs. So it would cost me a lot more to go to 4 gigs because all my RAM that I have now has already been, all my RAM sockets have already been filled. All right, the next pieces that are important in this scenario are listed here. The first one is the processor or the CPU. Now the processor you're buying must be compatible with the motherboard. Make sure you check your motherboard documentation before selecting a new CPU. So you don't want to just be looking around your local electronics store and say, hey, I think I'll pick up a new CPU for my computer and take it home and expect to just plug it in. Now, will it work? It might. On the other hand, it might not be compatible at all with your motherboard. So it's something you should take into consideration before you buy a new CPU. You want to make sure that that the type of the processor, the form factor, you want to look at, is it a 32-bit or 64-bit processor? You want to know the speed, how many cores are in that processor, and will your motherboard support that type of processor? All things to keep in mind. The next thing to keep in mind is your power supply. Can your power supply handle the power requirements of the CPU, the disk drives, the fans, and all the other components you want to connect to it? Each manufacturer of the component should tell you their power requirements, and you can total these to determine the number of watts needed for your power supply. So your PC power supplies typically run in the range from 100 to 500 watts, usually more in the middle, around 300. There's websites you can go to out on the internet where you can kind of total up the number of components you have, and it'll tell me or tell you how many watts are required for those components, and then you can look on the side of your power supply and see if it'll support that many watts. All right, the next topic here is your adapter card. Say you buy a new motherboard. Will you have to buy new adapter cards? Or will the new peripherals that were on your old adapter cards already be integrated into the new motherboard? So newer motherboards might have video integrated, Ethernet, USB, many of these different things perhaps you had adapter cards for in the previous system. All right, the next thing we want to talk about in our upgrading your PC scenario is your display device. Now, depending what you want to do with this computer, the video card may or may not be very important. For example, if you're playing action games, the video card you select makes a big difference on the computer. On the other hand, if you're just surfing the internet, checking your email, creating Word and Excel documents, a moderate video card will do just fine. So also, you should know that the video card you select, whether or not it will fit into the slot on your motherboard. So say right now you have an AGP card slot, but you don't have a PCIe slot. You need to make sure you get an AGP video card. On the other hand, maybe you don't have either one of those slots, but you want to play a high-end action game that requires a PCIe video card. Well, then you're going to have to change out your motherboard to be able to get that video card working on your computer. Now, when you look around at your monitor and your video card and you begin configuring your display devices, make sure you're familiar with some of these terms that are related to displays. First off, there's the brightness of the screen. This is the level of the dot intensity. So the dots that make up the screen, how bright are they? The next one is contrast. Contrast is the difference between true black and true white on the screen. Now, the higher the contrast, makes a screen look more sharp or sharper. Then there's the horizontal and vertical position on the screen. This is the centering of the screen. There's a horizontal and vertical size. So this is, will the screen stretch and fill up the whole monitor? Will it be even going outside the viewing area of the monitor, and you have to adjust it? Then there's degaussing. This is on CRT monitors only. This is an option to degauss and reduce magnetic interference on the monitor. All right, then there's your input devices. There's basic, there's specialty devices, and there's multimedia devices. Now, every PC is going to have a keyboard and a mouse, but other options you might want to add could be touchscreen. Maybe this is for a kiosk in a small retail store where people touch the screen to order products. A digitizer, maybe you're going to do CAD drawings and you need a big tablet and a digitizer to take and create plans from architectural drawings. How about a trackball? Maybe you want to do some graphics and you prefer a trackball. Or maybe you want to play a game and use a joystick. Now, these are all examples of input devices. Most input devices today are USB. Now, this may mean that you need a USB hub because you're out of USB ports to hook up these devices. Some USB hubs are powered and others are unpowered. Now, older peripherals use D subminiature connectors, such as DB25 serial ports, DB9 serial ports, or DA15s, which are game ports for joysticks. The next option you should look at is your cooling system. Your cooling system could just be a single fan, could be multiple fans, could be a lot more to it than just that. Now, first off, you have the processor or the CPU fan. Now, good systems will alert you to a fan failure, especially on servers. I've seen this where the server will alert you on the screen or in the event log that there's a fan failure. But it's also true on quality branded systems that have good BIOS and are able to talk to the fan and determine if the fan is really running. Now, you should also be able to configure a high temperature alert. So say you don't want the temperature in your computer to go above a certain degree, and if it does, you want to be alerted. So there's the case fan. That's another piece of your cooling system. There's the heat sink on the motherboard, or I'm sorry, on the processor that cools the processor. And make sure that you have thermal grease, which is kind of the thermal adhesive that connects the heat sink to the processor. That's how the heat is transferred between the processor and the heat sink. Water cooling might be an option if you really need to cool down that system and you have a lot of high temperature devices in there. Now, BIOS may be also it may be also possible for the BIOS to respond to cooling issues. So the BIOS might realize that the system's getting hotter, and it could increase the speed of the fan. This is how it works on some computers. So you take input devices and cooling into account. And then the last thing here we want to take into account is your storage device. And when I say storage device, I don't just mean hard drives. I'm also talking about CD, DVD drives, or any other sort of storage device you have. Now, some CD, DVD drives have jumpers that control the master, the slave, the select, and standalone modes. These are different modes so that when you have multiple devices, or if they're on the same bus as your hard drive, you have to configure these devices so that they don't conflict with each other. Now, when you install a new hard drive, make sure that your BIOS recognizes the hard drive. Then you'll have to use fdisk to partition the drive and format the format program to format a file system onto the hard drive. Or you could do all that in the graphical mode with Disk Manager. All right, you'll want to think about your BIOS. No matter what type of upgrade you do, when you consider doing that upgrade, think about your BIOS. Will your BIOS support these things you're going to upgrade? It must be compatible with the components in the system. Does it support the maximum size of your hard drive, for example? Now, the BIOS isn't as particular as, say, the operating system. The operating system's much more particular than the BIOS is going to be. When you increase the RAM, your BIOS will recognize that, and you'll have to go in and save the new RAM amount. When you change processors, you add or remove hard drives, you'll very likely have to go into the BIOS because you'll get some error when the system boots up that the BIOS recognizes a change. You can also upgrade your BIOS just like any other upgrade. Alright, the next task is a task that I ask you to perform. I recommend you take some time learning about the internal components of a PC yourself. The best way to do this is to build a PC from scratch or take one apart and put it back together. Now you could always do this with your home PC, but that's pretty risky. You don't want to take apart your only computer perhaps at your house and then not be able to use it again. So I suggest buying an old PC from a garage sale, a swap meet, or even on eBay. Sometimes you have a friend who's upgrading their PC and they just want to get rid of their old PC. Maybe it's broken or it's just really old. And get one of these PCs, get a small toolkit or just some screwdrivers from your garage, take one apart, put it back together, just see how it all fits, with your own eyes and doing it with your own hands. And that's something that I think is a great way to get a real hands-on feel for how a computer goes together. All right, the next task I have is for us to perform together. We're going to learn how to install and configure a monitor, RAM, and a hard drive. So first off, we'll start with a monitor. Let's say that you want to change the resolution on your monitor. Again, what's the best way to do that? You right-click on your desktop, you go into your display properties. And in the display properties, the first 4 tabs over here from the left, these are all tabs that control aesthetics, meaning what type of theme do you have? What's the desktop background? What's the screensaver that's configured? Here you can configure monitor power settings. Here you can configure the appearance of your windows, the fonts and the sizes of the text, and the colors of the windows. But the one tab here that really has a big change on the settings of your monitor and your video card is the settings tab right here. So on the settings tab, this is where you set so you can set up multiple monitors if you have 2 monitors and your video card has to support that. But you can have 2 monitors and you can have the picture stretched across 2 monitor screens. This is where you set the resolution. You slide this bar right here from left to right depending on the size. And notice how my number 1 monitor there gets larger and larger. Well, the physical monitor isn't getting larger, but the screen resolution is getting larger. So you're getting more detail out of that larger screen resolution. But if you have a smaller monitor, if your monitor isn't sizing to support the larger resolution, then you're just going to get tinier and tinier, smaller fonts and icons. So keep that in mind. This is where you set the number of colors, the color quality. If you go into advanced here, this is where you actually set the settings for your video card, your specific video card. So you may have a different video card than this one. On mine, this is where I set the dot pitch. This is where it tells me about my adapter. I have an ATI Mobility Radeon X600 with 128 megabytes of RAM. There's the BIOS for the video card right there. If I go into the monitor, this is where I tell the video card what kind of monitor I have. If I go into troubleshoot, this is where I configure my hardware acceleration that's supplied by the graphics card to make graphics move faster. Then here's where I set the color management for my video card. And then when it comes to physically hooking up your monitor, of course you need to make sure that you have the right type of plug on the monitor and on the video card. Make sure they match. Do you have a VGA plug or a DVI plug or some other type of plug? But generally it's going to be either an older VGA or a newer DVI plug. Make sure that the monitor and the video card, both support similar resolutions. Generally this is not a problem, but something you need to take into consideration. Do you want to watch DVDs on your computer? Do you want to watch movies? If so, maybe you want a widescreen to support the newer widescreen, DVDs. All things to take into consideration. All right, the next topic is RAM. Let's say I want to upgrade the RAM on my motherboard. Well, of course, you have the physical process of taking out the chips and putting in new chips. Then you have the software process where you boot up the computer and the BIOS recognizes that you've changed the amount of RAM you have and you have to confirm that you want to save that. So if I go here and I open this image, you can see here's the RAM on my motherboard. These are RAM slots, and this motherboard has 2 RAM slots. They're both filled. Well, say I wanted to upgrade my RAM, I'm going to have to take out this RAM and replace it with RAM that has higher density RAM per chip. So to take out the RAM, I push down on these 2 blue tabs on each side. The RAM will pop up. I take it out, I put in the new RAM, and I push straight down, and then these blue tabs on each side flip back up when I push it down in, and you'll hear a snap. So, of course, you need to make sure you power off the computer and you use an anti-static strap so you don't leave an electrostatic discharge and ruin the RAM or the motherboard. But replacing the RAM is really that easy. And then after that, what you have is you have your software where when you boot up the computer, the BIOS says the value of RAM has changed. Press a certain key to go in and save the new amount of RAM. So replacing the RAM involves both the hardware, the physical replacement, and then the software where you save it in the BIOS. Now the operating system itself doesn't really care the amount of RAM. It may recognize that and resize your virtual memory or something, but other than that, it's not going to tell you that the amount of RAM has changed. All right, the next task I want to talk about is how to upgrade or install a new hard drive. So let's go look at some photos first off. First off, of course, you have a hard drive. This is a hard drive here. Now that hard drive is going to be in your computer case. So let's open up this one. Here's your case. In this case, I have some 5-inch slots up here, and I have some 3-inch slots down here. Actually, a lot of 3-inch slots down here. So in this case, I could put a lot of different hard drives down here. Look at this: 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4, maybe 6 or more hard drives I could install in this one case. Typically, hard drives today are going to be the 3.5-inch variety down here that would go in the 3.5-inch slots. You see here, here's one hard drive that's already installed in this case. So say I wanted to replace this hard drive, I would take off the case on each side. I would get a Phillips head screwdriver, undo these 2 screws here that hold it in, 2 screws on the other side. It would come out. I would disconnect the cable that goes to the motherboard and the power supply cable. I would replace the hard drive in here, put in the new hard drive, screw it in with the 4 screws, insert the cable, the interface cable that goes to the hard drive controller on the motherboard, and the power supply cable. So here, this cable on the left, this is an example of a Molex power supply cable that would go to a hard drive or a CD-ROM. All right, here's the back of the hard drive. This is where you would plug in the hard drive interface cable here. This is where you would plug in the Molex power supply. This is a set of jumpers here. If you needed to set something on the hard drive, you would put on a jumper on one of these pins here, or on pairs of pins, and join them together like this. This is a jumper. So you've connected the hard drive, you've screwed it back in the case. We don't need that. We see the back of the hard drive here, a little bit bigger picture, and we've got our power supply all connected. So once you've connected the new hard drive, turn the computer back on, your BIOS is going to recognize you have a new hard drive. Then when you go into your operating system, you need to go into Disk Manager and partition the hard drive, format the hard drive with your operating system like NTFS, and that way it will be assigned a drive letter, and you can actually go use that hard drive. So just some common steps you need to go through to install a new hard drive. If you're installing a second, third, or fourth, or so on hard drive, that's much easier than replacing your current system hard drive, because your current system hard drive, of course, has your operating system on it where the computer boots up. Well, if you replace that, you have no more operating system, applications, or anything. You need to find some way to get that data off the old hard drive onto the new hard drive. And this could be where disk imaging is done, or a backup and a restore. All right, next we're going to take a little quiz. I didn't tell you there was going to be a quiz at the start, but I do have a quiz. Now, I want to tell you that these questions don't always relate to the things that are in this chapter. These are just some sample A+ hardware questions I wanted to share with you. The A+ hardware test covers a variety of different things, and it can be very difficult to predict exactly what's going to be on there. The important thing is that you prepared yourself well, and you know hardware, in and out, as well as software for the software, sections of the test. So these are some hardware questions. The first one is covering diagnostics and troubleshooting procedures. Says a user complains to you that his or her computer keeps rebooting on its own. You try reformatting and reinstalling the operating system. However, the problem still continues. What could be causing the problem? Well, is it the BIOS has an auto reboot setting enabled? Auto reboot setting in the BIOS just means, or may mean, that the system will recognize that the operating system's hung and reboot itself. That's not the case here. Um, let's see, the hard drive jumpers have been configured with an incorrect setting. No, probably not, or else it wouldn't work at all. The power supply is not supplying enough power. That could be the case. In fact, that seems like the best answer. It says here the answer is C, a faulty power supply with one supply or one with voltage fluctuations could make the computer reboot on its own. So the power from the power supply is fluctuating, not providing enough power to the motherboard and the processor, and the computer's rebooting. All right, question number 2. Installation, configuration, and upgrading. You're trying to identify various cables. What is a 3-row DB15 male connector plug used for? So DB15, and if you look at the plug here, notice it's kind of staggered. The pins in the middle are kind of staggered with the other pins. 15-pin male connector. What this is it says it's used by monitors. That's the correct answer. But specifically, it's used by VGA monitors, and it's the cable that comes from the monitor and plugs into the 15-pin VGA port on the back of the PC. So from the monitor, it's male to female on the back of the PC. If you have a newer monitor that's digital, like an LCD monitor, and it uses DVI, DVI cables don't look like this. So keep that in mind. All right, preventative maintenance. It says the CPU fan fails on one of your workstations. Which of the following could happen if you allow it to continue? Well, could you have hard drive damage? Probably not. CPU damage? Definitely so. The CPU could actually melt and fail. Could you have an unstable system? Definitely. I've seen this before with servers where the heat in the room goes up, and then after that the servers are unstable for months. Operating system damage? No, it's not going to damage your hard drive or your operating system. Or floppy disk damage? No. So option B and C are correct. If the CPU overheats, the system will become unstable, and you could have possible CPU damage. All right, 2 more questions. The next one is, your boss asks you to reconfigure a workstation with some new hardware. Unfortunately, the previous user set a password on the BIOS. What should you do to gain access to the BIOS? So when your computer first boots up, the post check is done and the BIOS is used to boot up the system. Well, you can configure a BIOS password so that whoever boots up the system has to type in this password. Now, the only way to get around this is typically to remove the CMOS battery, because the CMOS battery is what stores those settings such as the BIOS password, when the computer is completely powered off. So answer B is correct. You should remove the CMOS battery. All right, last question, number 5. Which of the following components are required for the post test to pass correctly? Is it the mouse and keyboard, the video card, the monitor, the RAM, or the CPU? Well, here it says B, D, and E are the correct answers, meaning you have to have a video card, even if you don't have a monitor hooked up to it, which is option C. So you really don't need a monitor, but you have to have that video card. You really don't need a keyboard and a mouse, but some BIOSes will check to see if they're present, and they'll beep and stop if you don't have them. You can go into the BIOS and tell it to ignore that and move on. But you definitely have to have a video card, you definitely have to have RAM, and you definitely have to have a CPU. You don't have to have a hard drive, but of course the computer has to boot from somewhere, either the network, could be an external USB drive, a flash drive, could be a CD, or you could have an internal hard drive. So an internal hard drive by itself is not required. All right, and with that, we've reached the end of our video. This is an A-plus technician video covering PC components. This is part 1, and in this video we learned about upgrading and installing new motherboards, storage, CPU, RAM, and power supplies. We looked at a new computer system and what it might offer and the different options, and we learned about what it would take to upgrade our current system to be similar to that new system. All the things we would have to take into consideration when shopping for those different components. We learned about how to install a new display device or configure a new display device, change our resolution, configure our video card. We learned about what it would take to upgrade RAM. You have both the hardware part where you physically insert the RAM, then you have the software part where you have to configure it in the BIOS, or basically just acknowledge that the RAM amount that was saved has changed. Then we learned about configuring a new hard drive or adding a new hard drive, what it would take to physically take out the old hard drive or add a new hard drive. You saw the adapter cables and the power cables that go on there. And then once the computer booted up, you would have to use Disk Manager to partition and format that new hard drive. And again, that's the end of our A-plus technician video covering PC components, part 1. Thank you very much.